Welcome to our hard to believe 13th week. We're doing this, and time just keeps on moving. And there are a lot of changes that are taking place from week to week. Unlike many things where from week to week nothing seems to happen, every week we learn more about coronavirus and we learn more about ourselves and human nature. We still want to keep all of our first line providers in our thoughts and prayers. This includes all of our law enforcement, which are helping us at this time. We also want to keep in mind the family of George Floyd. What happened was indefensible. It should not happen in this day and age. It's hard to believe that it could happen in broad daylight with so many of his colleagues around him, but it did, and justice will occur. Unfortunately, there is some collateral damage. The peaceful movements to help bring civil liberties to people who feel they are missing has been hijacked by a small group that are committing violence. And this is a picture of the Verizon store, which is owned by Viken's cousin, which was ransacked in California. So our thoughts and prayers are with the George Floyd family as well. What's happened this week is we reached another milestone. There's so many milestones that we've blown past. We now have over 6.5 million people affected in the world. But before I talk about a milestone, there was a very interesting piece of research that came out when they studied the genome of the coronavirus. When the scientists were studying the genome, and this is an article that appeared in Science Advances, of the coronavirus from the bat, they also noticed there was a genome sequence. The genome is the genetic code that tells a virus how to behave. And it came from what's called a pangolin. They found that the receptor site for the ACE2 receptor actually comes from the pangolin. So I thought that was very interesting science. There more has to be done, but we're learning more about this virus, and this just shows its relationship and its origins, which is interesting. We do have 6.5 million people in the world affected, 385,000 deaths in the U.S. We have 1.8 million people affected, and you can see where that might go, over 2 million in the near future. 107,000 deaths. The CDC has predicted that by June 27th, 127,000 Americans will have perished. They also came out with a report that said across the country, 25,000 Americans in nursing facilities died of COVID-19, 60,000 were afflicted by it. And in the nursing staff that helps in the nursing homes, 34,000 staff members were affected and 400 people died. So that would shows, again, some of our most vulnerable populations. We had a subtle change in CCD wording on how the disease is transmitted. It's believed to be much more respiratory than fomite. It was a subtle change, but it was indicating a downplaying of the virus being picked up from surfaces, although it's still a mechanism that can occur. In the U.S., we do see a declining death rate. The number one per capita death rate is unfortunately in Sweden. Sweden has taken a different approach than many other countries in the world. Many countries did a strict lockdown with all the collateral damage. Sweden decided to have very loose social distancing standards where you can have up to 49 people together in a gathering. And unfortunately, the consequences have been fatal, where it has, again, the highest fatality rate in the country and the world, even when compared to its neighboring Scandinavian countries that enacted stricter social distancing. Peru, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico still are a hotbed with increasing disease that Dr. Stamboulian referred to last week. And they make up 4 of the top 7 cases in the world where it's occurring. When WHO did a survey of all the countries in the world, they found 155 had decreased access to routine care for treating the non-infectious morbidities, all the risk factors for COVID-19. So again, the people that need it most are not getting the care they need. And then we see in their studies, as has been shown in a lot of other studies, that a disproportionate impact on the racial and ethnic minorities. And we clearly have seen that here in the United States in a number of studies. We've seen an increase in social unrest, and it's hard to, without data, to say that coronavirus contributed to this, but clearly there's some coronavirus-related issues to large gatherings, and we're clearly worried between Memorial Day weekend and all these protests that there might be an increase in disease that may occur. On the bright note, we have the National Football League talking about restarting. They voted to restart. We don't know the date yet. They've joined the National Hockey League, and baseball, they're still negotiating. So we'll see what happens. So that's it on my side. We do have one announcement. A member amongst us had an amazing webinar. I tuned in, and I was shocked at how many people joined. Dr. Mahakian, can you tell us a little bit about your webinar?
Sure, Larry. Well, your blasting out of the webinar flyer, I think, did it. But thank you. I mean, it was amazing. The numbers say it all, right? It was on elder abuse and COVID-19 and looking at the increased vulnerabilities of the older person. Joining me on the webinar was Dr. Armenian, who's a gerontologist from USC. So we had a great, an excellent turnout. A handful of folks were healthcare professionals from the United States, and around 85 or 6 or 7 of them were from Armenia. So we had planned ahead and had a translator, which was great, from the High Commissioner Office for Diaspora Affairs in Armenia. So that really helped. But basically, we looked at, and discussed and defined, like, what is elder abuse, right? Its prevalence, its risk factors. Looking at social isolation right now, as you know, not only here, but in Armenia, the older person is at home, they're isolated, and they're not going to those daycare programs that they were going to before. So we also looked at, the greatest risk factors, in addition to the isolation, is having a dementia, having a memory loss. So then we began to discuss, ways to kind of mitigate elder abuse, and looked at that, starting a conversation, just planting the seeds about stigma, right, in Armenia. Just like there's stigma with dementia, there's stigma with elder abuse. For reportedly, it doesn't occur. It is occurring, and it is definitely occurring in different forms, not only financial, but physical abuse and emotional abuse in Armenia. We talked about, what do you do? What was one of the questions? What happens logistically if someone calls, for example, several years ago, we rolled out the Alzheimer's Care hotline in Armenia. This is a national hotline endorsed by the Ministry of Health. Well, what do what happens? What does that look like? Those were really good questions. Mara Matosian from the Women's Support Center was present, and she talked about the very near future they'll have also a national hotline for domestic abuse, which is very good. We also talked about, what are those resources right now in Armenia? They're far and in between, but they are improving. And as programs and organizations, we work together. Like, for example, Mission Armenia is now helping quite a lot in that area with women and men who have had some form of abuse. So it was successful. I think kind of like next steps, I'm putting together, I had shared with Larry, a 3-part educational training series for healthcare professionals in Armenia to really give them an idea of what is abuse, but also how do you assess that? how do you assess it? How do you intervene? What steps do you need to take? I'm also putting together a resource booklet for the Ministry of Health, and this resource booklet will be healthcare professionals that are going to be able to deal and cope and be a resource for people, not only people with dementia, but also domestic violence and abuse. So thank you. I mean, it was amazing. It was very shocking to see the turnout, and it just told us that, it just shows that there's such a need.
No, it's really not talked a lot about. The first time I became aware of it, we were having a meeting at the U.S. Embassy. We were on a medical mission, and a Peace Corps volunteer who was sitting in the back of the room came up to me later and whispered in my ear and told me all about what was happening in very rural areas. So we have a interesting panel. We're going to have representatives from the AGBU, the AMAA, the Armenian Relief Society, as well as the Karagoshin Foundation. We're going to be reaching out to Janishan as well. So it'll be a nice panel discussion about Beirut, and I know that's near and dear to your heart, Solene. Solene, what can you tell us this week about updates on coronavirus and children and adults?
First of all, we're very excited, at least here in New York City, that Monday is going to be our phase 1 of reopening. And the rest of New York State has already started that. So hopefully we will start. But as Larry said, we're worried because many of the protesters that are protesting for a cause we all strongly believe in, unfortunately, are close together and are not wearing masks all the time. So we just are crossing our fingers that we're not going to see another peak in a couple of weeks. So the rates of positive tests, so out of many tests that are being run in the city right now, only 3% are positive. And as a comparison, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later, in Armenia, the rate of positivity is between 35 to 40% in the past week. So those are the numbers we were seeing here, back in March and April. So that is really very worrisome. Good news for the dentists. I see Aram, I see Tallinn. In New York State, all the dentists are going to open. And yeah, I did email you all the COCA calls. These are educational calls, webinars that the CDC does. And this one on Wednesday was about the guidelines for dentists. So you can just Google CDC COCA call and it will give you the free webinar. And also the state itself, New York State, is also soon going to publish guidance on best practices for safety and social distancing in dental offices. So as soon as I have that, I can forward it to you or you can look it up. That's really it. As far as the treatment stuff, I know that last week, me even not excitedly, but just mentioned that there was a huge article of thousands and thousands of patients where they showed that patients who were treated with hydroxychloroquine tended to have a big mortality rate to the point that the WHO had to stop one of the hydroxychloroquine trials. So it turns out that that data was really, let's call it fake. A lot of astute scientists who know exactly, much more than us readers what's going on were surprised that they had access to thousands and thousands of patients that nobody else had. And so therefore that study was retracted today. So it turns out that this author has a company and it's very much, it basically gives incentive to hospitals and gets the access to their medical record, but there was no detailed experimentation, and a lot of the data was incorrect. Another article that was published that I personally was waiting for is post-exposure prophylaxis. What that means is that, let's say I don't have the disease, but I got in very, very close contact with someone who does. And will me taking hydroxychloroquine prevent me from getting the disease? So that was just published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And again, the data there show that there isn't a difference whether you take hydroxychloroquine or don't. The majority of the people were healthcare workers, and they took the medicine about day 3 to 4. So of course, it always remains to see whether if they took it within 1 to 2 days, would it have made a difference versus taking it on day 3 to 4. And the incidence of disease was low anyway between the two groups, for those of us who like statistics. So it's not a big thing to compare each group to, but just by this study, it seems again that it's not going to be a magic bullet even in preventative studies. So that's where I'm going to stop. I think I did less than usual, and I'll take questions if there is any.
Just Celine, thank you. Any details about those retracted articles? It's in a way shocking that Lancet and NEJM, we know those two journals very well. We know the editors, we know the deputy editors, yes, and we know how careful they are. So this happens, it's happened, maybe that's the answer. Do you have any other insight into what really did happen?
I personally don't. We just did a journal club on it today within our own hospital. And I know those of us, I have some colleagues younger than me who are very active on Twitter. And they were saying that it was actually first really voices were raised on Twitter. So social media is what really is driving a lot of this. And then one key thing for me was that there was a major error where the numbers they quoted for Australia is completely different from what Australia's CDC is quoting as far as their total numbers and death numbers. So somebody who, actually took the time to just compare that basic, simple thing, you don't need hospital data to look at that, just the public CDC data. That's where they said that there is a major discrepancy. Yeah, it is shameful. I mean, it did say that it was a quick overview even last week, but the fact that they had 15,000 access up to April 2nd, where we didn't even have that many patients yet, I think was another thing that was alerting people. That's all I know. I don't know much of the, much more than that. And because the same author was the New England Journal, he actually retracted his own New England Journal article. Yeah, it's shameful, but that there is tons and tons of papers also now we have access to before they are even peer reviewed. This is just an unprecedented time in science. So before we didn't even see these papers before they were published. Now you can read anything and believe anything, but yeah, I mean, some of my colleagues have bets that still hydroxychloroquine is going to work. People have bet $100, $200. Let's see. That story is still, I think, to be told. Cool. And the other, the pre-exposure prophylaxis trial is also ongoing. And that's going to be 15,000 people in the US. So hopefully that will tell us something.
Thank you.
Celine, this is the reason, this Lancet article was the reason why WHO halted its study.
Yes, so now they resumed it. They resumed it. Right. And even the WHO, who you think should have access to all this, even they probably don't have enough time to analyze it well. They stopped it. And now they resumed the hydroxychloroquine arm of their 4-arm study.
Right.
It's just a wild, wild west, I think. So, but we haven't, in our hospital, we're not giving hydroxychloroquine to anyone based on the FDA recommendations that came out 3 weeks ago that we talked about, or 4 weeks ago by now. So only in trial settings, I think at this point people are doing, but I am going to admit to you that I have some of my cardiology colleagues who are taking it as prophylaxis. They don't care.
John, can you tell us the numbers again? How many articles per day the New England Journal we're getting and the JAMA Journal?
Yeah, well, actually, I was just talking with Cliff Rosen, who is the deputy editor. Yeah, they're still getting, I can't believe they're getting 150 articles a day. And this may also speak to the problem of screening. They have a very rapid, I know NEJM has this, Lancet does too. So they get this deluge of papers, and the editors read what comes in literally overnight. And they make a cut, 95% of what they read is immediately rejected. They have to, because there's no way you can peer review 150 papers a day. And this one got in, I don't know how it got in. And then it goes through the process. So errors are going to be made. I mean, we know Nobel Prize winning papers have had to be retracted. So this is in the nature of science. Nothing is absolutely true. And there are times when the peer review process falls down. And this is one of them. The problem I see is that hydroxychloroquine, there still is no evidence that the drug is efficacious in any way. And your point about the QT interval, you can track your Apple Watch. I don't mind that at all. But the prolonged QT interval is a setup for sudden death.
Of course. No, I know.
So,
I'm not.
So you can die while you're watching your Apple Watch.
And these are cardiologists doing this. They are the ones taking the meds are cardiologists. And we're telling them, you out of everyone should avoid this. You don't, but
Yeah, amazing.
One thing I wanted to also say, sorry guys, because for those of you who, summer day camps statewide, I just took a couple of notes, can open on June 29 here in New York. Yesterday, the Boston people told me that all the Armenian camps for the summer are canceled. So I don't know, Anita, AGBU, I don't know what you're thinking about New York, but at least they're going to allow, obviously, as of July, some camps. Obviously, it's not going to look the same, smaller groups, a lot of changes, but just something to know that they're allowed to have summer day camps, but sleepaway camps, the decision is still pending, whether they're going to allow that.
We have canceled all sleepaway
probably
camps,
that's wise,
but we're doing virtual. I mean, we're really nice packages they're going to take home with them. They pick up and then go home and do, at home.
We have a question regarding the rash that children get and related to Kawasaki's disease. Could you give us?
Yeah, sure. Like I said, I don't know, Dr. Stamboulian, if you're in the acceleration phase, you probably will see this later. But now, I said this last week, now that the cases dramatically have decreased in adults, it's been 10 days now, all of New York State, we haven't seen a single case of this MISC or MISC, which includes the Kawasaki-like disease. It's been 10 days. But the total number in New York State from the end of April to, I guess, the last week of May, since we stopped seeing cases, is about 200. We don't know exactly how many cases are nationwide. We know, for example, Children's Hospital in Boston has 20, California has 20. They're just a handful in each hospital, but New York is contributing 200 cases total of, we don't know how many the N is going to be at the end. But we are very happy that we are not seeing it anymore in the past 7 to 10 days.
What's the feeling that you're getting about vaccine development? I mean, things are happening at breakneck speed.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that this week because I believe nothing is going to be available till next year. So why bother looking? I have other things to. And, we're very busy. Business is back. We want people to go to their doctors. We want people to get their vaccines, as much normalcy as possible.
Yeah, and another company entered the antibody space. Eli Lilly is testing their antibody out on 32 hospitalized patients. That's a monoclonal antibody. And they're expressing optimism that they're going to have one ready for commercial use in the fall.
Actually, Larry, I do want to mention, I think, because you did mention that during the AMIC meeting on Sunday about the convalescent plasma. I heard an excellent talk about that today from a former colleague who actually, she and Dr. Casadoval and Hopkins, and her name is Pirovsky at Montefiore, they actually initiated this whole plasma study. Again, of course, it's her baby. She believes in it. But there is really good data coming on that, similar to the remdesivir. So it's not a magic bullet, but there is definitely positive effect. So I think for Armenia, it might be definitely something good to discuss because obviously you don't have to pay for it. Obviously, it's a process to get it, but at least it's not like remdesivir, so where you have to purchase it or whatever. So I think we definitely need to spend some time on plasma for Armenia.
Okay. Very good. And that's the work of the Armenian Bone Marrow Donor Registry. Dr. Sepelian is with us. Dr. Sepelian, can you give us some information about where that project stands with the Armenian Bone Marrow Donor Registry?
Larry, excuse me, what would you like to know about the Armenian donor?
They were, Dr. Sepelian might be able to fill us in, he just joined us, but the director had joined us on an OMIC meeting and was telling us how they were beginning to look at isolating convalescent serum, which is the antibodies from people who've recovered from disease.
Another very interesting study that's going to be launched soon. I thought you were referring to that, where they're looking at the genotypes and trying to identify why some people succumb to the disease and why others don't. Mm-hmm. So it's something that we should follow and maybe get Frida Jordan back again to talk about it, because I think it's going to be quite exciting.
That'll be great. Thank you. And Dr. Sepelian?
Yeah, Larry, thank you, by the way. And indeed, we've been trying to push Armenia to organize their experts in gathering around convalescent therapy. However, it's been met with a little bit of resistance, let's say, because the stakeholders in the hematology world in Armenia are polarized, and as much as we've been trying to push them and put the fire under them, there's been a little bit of pushback. The Armenian Bone Marrow Registry, however, did get approved to do a study on, just as Dr. Najarian was mentioning, so genetic factors that predispose from an HLA typing standpoint, where some get impacted by COVID-19 in a more severe way, where others may just be asymptomatic and shed the virus and then, get rid of the virus. So this was approved by the Ministry of Health, and they are moving forward with this. And we hope to get some updates that we can contribute to the world medical literature.
That's great. And our very own Dr. Bill Ezekian is also studying, we'll have in about a month or so, some results of vitamin D studies in COVID patients.
We're right in the middle. We've already studied 40 patients in the Lusavorich Hospital, and we will be measuring, I guess, around 400 COVID-19 hospitals. And initially, that hospital was admitting anyone who is COVID-19 positive. Now they've changed it a bit. But anyway, the point is that there's a broad spectrum of disease, and the measurement of vitamin D, which has been implicated in well before COVID-19 as an antibacterial and an antiviral agent with regard to innate and adapted immunity. There is a lot of sort of non-peer-reviewed and intriguing data that might implicate vitamin D in the risk as well as the outcome. A database of the entire Armenian population that we just completed on vitamin D levels. So we know what the levels of vitamin D are throughout the country. So we have an established database with which we can compare the hospitalized patients with. So stay tuned, and I'll be happy to share with you the data when they become available.
Thank you so much, John. It's a very interesting study. We have time for one more question, and this was a question regarding BCG. Is there any evidence that if you can boost the immune system through vaccinations like BCG and others, you can help protect yourself from the ravages of COVID-19?
BCG vaccine is very good to protect against tuberculosis, against meningitis due to
tuberculosis, correct.
Tuberculosis, but there is no any evidence that the BCG could be used for COVID-19 yet.
We're having some technical difficulties. Dr. Roger is actually with us. He's FaceTiming me, and we'll be viewing his slides via FaceTime in just a few moments. But what we're going to do is, the reason we have Roger Ohanesian, there's so many reasons, but I thought this was really apt following Professor Barton Gregorian's talk. Dr. Gregorian spoke about what it takes to be successful, some of the characteristics of success. And I just wanted to review what those are. So when we listen to Dr. Ohanesian speak, we can think about what he's done and what a monumental accomplishment it has been for his organization to still function after it was founded in 1992, decades later. What we see for successful organizations is that they've identified a true need in the population, and they develop a very sound strategy. And then they have a strategy that's self-sustaining, so the project can take a life of its own. The idea or the strategy, the mission, needs to be very clearly communicated. So it has to be a very focused message that people can absorb, internalize, and say, gee, you know, that might be a really good idea for me to participate in. I think one of the real critical aspects of working in any country is having local partners. And I think when we look at Dr. Ohanesian's project, when we look at the osteoporosis treatment project and other projects that are very successful, it's not because we have people from the diaspora squashbuckling in Armenia saying this is the way we do it. It's more because there are people that develop friendships and partnerships and ask, how can we do this? And then they implement the plan together. They're continuously learning also from ongoing challenges. And you know, when you talk to any successful person, it wasn't just all a bed of roses. There was always challenges along the way. And I think it's requires a certain personality type. It requires being very persistent. It requires being resilient when you meet adversity. How do you bounce back? And clearly, you need internal energy and passion. Without the passion, it's not going to happen. And then overall, you have to be optimistic. So what are the impediments of success? Well, just the opposite, really. And, you know, it's really, we've all met people who've done projects in Armenia, and for a whole variety of reasons, they're just very upset, disillusioned, and they just drop out of the community. And we're a small community, and we really can't afford that. But generally, it's just a lack of focus. They can't communicate their message. They don't have a message that they're articulating well. They really lack the financial resources. You know, it's very easy to have an idea, but then when you implement it, you need equipment, you need finances, and you need personnel that can work with you. They don't have any local partners, and some people don't know how to delegate. Some people can't get along with others. Their personality type is not the type that's really conducive to developing a long, sustaining project. And then political turbulence can sometimes get in the way, again, if you don't have all the personality factors that go into making something successful. So the final thoughts on this is that when I think of medical philanthropy as medical entrepreneurism, we're basically building little companies. And when you look at what the success rate is of building little companies, it's very, very low. There's a 20% failure rate after 1 year, a 50% failure rate after 5 years. And if you go out 10 years, only 30% of the companies are still in existence. So these are really quite dismal numbers. And when you think of the well-intentioned spirits of people who get involved, who commit their own resources, their time, and they come up empty-handed, it's really a tragedy. So it's not only in medical philanthropy, it's in education and pretty much every aspect of what all the nonprofits do in Armenia and elsewhere. So I guess the real challenge for all of us is to learn from people like Dr. Ohanesian and Dr. Bilazikian who've been successful and ask ourselves, what kind of institutional building can we do? So when we spot people with these talents, we can encourage them and foster their careers so their projects are successful. So having said that, we're going to get to meet him in just a few moments. I had the pleasure of meeting Roger in the 1990s when we shared a few patients together through the Eye Care Project and have been on medical missions with him. I can tell you he's just a tremendous person to be with, very humble. He actually grew up in Boston. He's first generation Armenian American. His parents were survivors of the genocide. They fled to Boston for their family's safety. He was very influenced by his uncle, Dr. Kazanjian, who's the famous plastic surgeon who did miracles with the World War I injuries that happened around that time. As a student growing up, he developed a love for the outdoors, was not only a scout, but an Eagle Scout. And we joke about going camping together. So one day we're going to do that, Roger. He went to Boston University, followed by the University of Vermont. And this, again, this first generation back then, and this is really quite an accomplishment to do all of this. He did 2 years of research at the NIH, and then went off to Laguna Beach, California, after doing his ophthalmology studies at Harvard. He started Harvard Eye Associates, which is really a multifaceted ophthalmology practice with, how many partners do you have now, Roger?
13.
13 partners. So really quite an accomplishment there as well. There's so many things that Roger has accomplished over his span since he started the Eye Care Project in 1992. The story of how he got involved, I'll let him tell. It's inspiring. He's led more than 54 medical missions to Armenia. And when we say medical missions, no one is paying for these medical missions. Everybody pays their own way on these medical missions, their own hotel, their own food, their own equipment and drugs. It's really a great spirit that has really driven the Eye Care Project and all of the volunteers over the years. And I know some of them are on the phone today, including Dr. Davidian. He's implemented countrywide screening programs throughout the whole country, and over 500,000 patients have been screened by the Mobile Eye Hospital since the inception. When we talk about ophthalmology, you know, it's a very small organ, but there are many, many different parts of this organ. And what he's done is provided training to many different doctors to basically create the Harvard of the whole Caucasus area. This is a center of excellence that people come throughout the Caucasus and Moscow for expert eye care. And it's a great model. You know, we heard Professor Gregorian speaking about building the Mayo Clinic. This is a potential model of how it's done in ophthalmology, and Dr. Bilazikian in osteoporosis. And if we can just duplicate this all along the way, and I know we have Dr. Babigian in neurology is also doing some great things. We provided over 80,000 Armenian patients with glasses free of charge. And, you know, as things change, as technology changes, so does the Eye Care Project. They developed a new project about 4 years ago, treating a blinding disease called retinopathy of prematurity. This is a disease that we don't see often here in the United States. It's related to too much oxygen that children get. Is implement a screening program and actually provide very masterful expert treatment, which is really the envy of all the Caucasus areas, and has really changed the course of these children's lives and for their families and for Armenia. So it's really awesome. He's has held, fostered really a lot of scientific research. And when you go to Armenia to the medical meetings, it's amazing to see how much research is actually being done and discussed. In fact, he's held over 18 international meetings in Armenia, which are, he'll tell a story about how many people attended the first one and how many people attended the last one. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce a real hero, someone who's been really, really persistent and doing so much for all of us. And we're going to start, Dr. Roger, by explaining what this gun and this knife is. I mean, of all things, where does that come from?
Thank you, Larry. I've got to correct a couple of things before we start. First of all, I'm second generation, not first. And my parents my parents came over, excuse me, my grandparents came over from Armenia, and my parents then both worked. And of course, as in most families, most Armenian families anyway, I spent an awful lot of time with my grandparents. And in spending all the time with my grandparents, I then heard a lot of stories from my grandfather, who actually, after he had married, he came over to America, and that was in, I think, 1910. And then when the genocide occurred, when they were fighting, then he went back to fight against. And when he did, fortunately, he was able to survive, because had he not, my mother would not have gotten born, and that would have been the end of the Klan right then. So he came back and told me all these war stories, and of course kids love war stories. And then when I was 12 years old, he gave me his knife and his gun, and that's what that is. Those photographs that Larry had sent out. I've got them here somewhere as well. It's some slides of the Armenian Eye Care projects that you might want to see. Larry, you'll tell me if these are not lined up well. There.
You can go a little to your left.
Oh.
That's perfect.
Okay. Now, this guy is my grandfather. And this is him when he went back over with a band of brothers. I mean, these guys just came from all different parts of America and actually Europe and Asia, and came back to fight against the Turks. And so when they did, my grandfather, who had this knife and his gun that he had, so when I was 12 years old, he gave me that and gun. And he said to me, someday you're going to get the call to and help Armenia, your ancestral home. And he said, and when you do, you'll be able to defend yourself. So lo and behold, 40 years later, I got that call. And it was from Ari Ter-Gregorian, who was, let me see if I can do this the right way. Here we are. Ari Ter-Gregorian, who's the man on the right, who actually sent a letter to all of us, all we Armenians, doctors in America. And he sent it actually to many around the world. And he said, we're in deep trouble. We're at war with Azerbaijan. We've got a lot of the usual diseases that happen in the country. And we've got a lot of our doctors that are over fighting and helping out in that war, which was for Kadaban. And, you know, I mean, for myself, what could I do? This was exactly what my grandfather told me about. And so, of course, I had to go. And with really only a couple of days' notice, I left for Armenia. In 2 days after I had gotten his fax in the mail. My wife and son were going to be going off to London. We were going to go on vacation. So I asked her, said if I were Armenia, if you would mind. And she said, no, go ahead. You know, I envy you. So when I got there, this is what I encountered. I mean, it was really dismal. The people were in terrible shape, and the equipment was very old. This is a group of people that were, these were a group of men who had been in the war and had been blinded, and the doctors who were amongst them. But these guys, you know, they had penetrating wounds, sometimes in both eyes, and couldn't see. So these were the things that we were facing. It was just horrendous. The doctors, as I say, used sheets and that had been washed multiple times, and operated on microscopes that were really very old. The injuries were, of course, very severe. This guy took a rocket to the eye, and he pulled it out and threw it, and it exploded elsewhere, but not without causing him third-degree burns. Others as well got injuries that were blows to the eye and to the orbit. And there were an awful lot of children that had injuries. And this kid had what I saw very frequently, which was the kids would pick up a landmine and would blow injuries into their eye and then destroy them. There are kids, this is one that I remember very well. This kid came with his parents and he was crying. And I asked the parents, I mean, he had had penetrating wounds into both eyes. Both eyes were enucleated, and both eyes became infected and were enucleated. And I asked the parents, gee, poor kid, I mean, I feel very sorry for him, but he's crying. Is he in pain? And the parents were crying too. And they said, no, we thought you brought new eyes from America. And that's the way it is. I mean, the people there really expected, we're Americans, we can do anything. And so it really, going there, made me realize that we had to really perform very well for them. And this was a young woman I saw on that first trip and got, and had operated on. She had uveitic glaucoma, because there were plenty of normal diseases of the eye as well. So she had uveitic glaucoma in her right eye, the more squinted eye. And so I operated on her. And after I came back home, this was on the very first trip. After I came back home, she wrote a letter, which was really, I still have the letter. And she wrote, "Dear Doctor, when I first met you, I had great hope, and you were able to succeed in operating on my eye and removing the cataract and making the glaucoma go away. But, and I was very happy. But in the past few weeks, I've noticed from the averted gazes of the look on my patients, on my parents' faces, and the averted gaze of the doctors, that I'm not doing well. Please come back. Please don't abandon me." So within 6 months of the first time of going to Armenia, I went again. And this time brought with me Rick Hill, who's spent non-stop period of time while we were there in the operating room. This guy worked like crazy. He was just terrific. I will say is that I've been now probably 70, 75 times. Rick Hill has been at least 50 times. There's no Armenian blood in this guy, yet he realized just exactly what needed to be done. And he, as well as multiple others, have come time and time and time again. And, you know, as everyone who operates over there, things are primitive. You dip your hands into some alcohol that is freezing cold. As a matter of fact, everything is freezing cold there, in the winter anyway. And one of the things that they need always is a lot of equipment. And so we've been able to bring over numerous, I'm sorry for this. This is not going as well as I thought. So we bring equipment, we bring it, and that's what they really need. These instruments are ones that we put in the operating room. We've got a television there, and we've been successful in getting Alcon, Allergan, Bausch & Lomb, all of these companies to give us stuff for free. And we had to, because we didn't have any money. This was, this really was my own money, Rick's own money. We all pay for ourselves. And if there's anything that we bring over, we have to beg from companies to bring it. for us to bring it. And we also get it usually done for free through the aircraft carrier. At that time, we had the United Armenian Fund. So they were the ones with Haruch Sasunian and who would bring over all the equipment. And this is that guy, the one that had the rocket in the eye. And another doctor came over with a Howard Kahn, good Armenian name. Howard Kahn operated on this guy and at least made it so his kids he wasn't frightening his kids anymore. And for that, he was very happy. And he, you know, with a eye patch, he really regains his good looks again. This is Armin Vardanian. One of the things that we learned early on was everyone over there is a general ophthalmologist. And so whatever came in the door, they would do. If it was cataract, they do it. If it was glaucoma, they do glaucoma surgery. If it is that required a cornea transplant, they would do that. And I realized that's certainly not the best of the ways to do things, and no one had any specialty training. So that then became the next challenge. You know, when Larry was talking about the challenges that we faced, there were numerous ones that, you know, you tend to forget about now, 20, 30 years later. But I realized it was very important to get people over. And, of course, that's going to cost money. Not only are they going to come over, but they needed equipment and so forth when they went back. So I turned to Krikorian. I got very lucky there because he was just a very, very gentle guy and extremely generous. I spoke to him about the program, the program to get people into America where they would get a fellowship. And I was able to, I had a lot of friends here, and I went up to them and asked them. Barry Cooperman took on Armin Vardanian, and Barry Cooperman, who's the chief of retinal surgery and actually now chief of ophthalmology at UCI. So he took on Armin Vardanian. Let's see if I've got, there he is, that's Armin. And as a fellow for a year. And Lilith Voskanyan, this young woman who became a glaucoma specialist, damn it. And then next is AAHPO Kimyan, who became a cornea specialist. That's she actually took fellowships. One with Eric Donenfeld here, seen here to her left, and took a uveitis fellowship, and then went with Ed Holland and took a fellowship in cornea. So she really turned out terrifically for us. And this is Armenian Garagashushan, who took a neuro-ophthalmology and orbital surgery fellowship and a low vision fellowship. So now things were really very good in the capital, but it was the hinterland that really needed help. So I was told, I don't know if any of you know John Hughes. John Hughes, the Orange County Register sent over a journalist and a photojournalist on about 1996, and they did a big article on the Eye Project. And John Hughes quit his job at the Orange County Register and stayed in Armenia, starting an internet newsletter, a newspaper that actually was quite successful. And he was doing well, the hinterland, the rural areas, it was like going back in time about 50 to 100 years. So it then became something that it was necessary to have some sort of care for the for people in the far distant areas. So there was a lot of challenges there to decide which is the best of the ways. And I can tell you, from having sent people out to the rural areas where they didn't have any equipment, we started to try to figure out how to get equipment. Again, turned to Orion, but at that point in time, he had other areas that he was funding. So that didn't turn out to be such a good success rate with getting more equipment for all of these other areas out in the hinterland. So instead was the idea of the mobile eye hospital, and building it was a challenge, but we have now an 18-wheel truck that has been around the country now they're on their 9th rotation around the country. And it's got 2 exam rooms, 2 lasers, and a full-on operating room that's equipped with all known equipment that we have in our regular operating room. And the beauty of it is they've got suspension, because those of you who know Armenian know that the roads are terrible. I mean, a Volkswagen could drop into some of the ruts in the road. And here, the guy that built it in New Hampshire got this long tractor trailer and was able to put the equipment in the inside and had suspensions and spring, all sorts of ways to keep it from, so the equipment would not be destroyed. And it's been very successful. And everywhere that it goes, it's well known because we have ads on it. Those are the people that have really spent an awful lot of money on this. The donors the Armenian donors have been fantastic. They've given all of the equipment that's in here has been paid for. The doctors that are in the capital will alternately come out whenever there's a case or a cluster of cases out in the rural areas and perform surgery should it be necessary. But also, this guy, Asatur, is a terrific surgeon, and he teaches others how to do the surgery within. This is within the operating room. Now, we have teaching sessions and frequently, so every time we go, there's a big teaching session. Plus, they teach each other, which is a great way for them all to learn. And they teach kids as well. And the beauty of teaching the kids, the importance is, during that war, there were a lot of landmines that were dropped. And these kids would find them, pick them up, and blow off a hand or kill them. So it was important to show the kids about the eye, what it looks like, how the important, and then also what these landmines look like to keep them from destroying themselves. And then came babies that were premature, and this guy is Tom Lee. And when they told me about how bad things were in the country with retinopathy prematurely, that they'd lose, there'd be somewhere between 150 and 200 cases every year. And these are cases that are bilateral. And I mean, we often would say is that these poor kids, the first glimpse they get of their mother is usually their last, because both eyes have these vascular changes, and the eyes will bleed, and often there's not much that can be done at that point. So I went to a American Academy of Ophthalmology meeting, and Tom Lee was there and was giving the lectures on this. And I asked him afterwards if he'd come to Armenia to instruct people there how they could be done. And he said, I've got a lot of things going on. I don't think I'd be able to make it. And he told me one excuse after the other, and he finally hit me with the big one, which said, well, I'll have to ask my wife. Well, the beauty of it is that he came with us in 2010, and he's continued to come year after year. And last year, we teamed up so that we're now partners, and he's building a pediatric, not just pediatric ophthalmology, but a pediatric department there, bringing over neonatologists, pediatric cardiologists, ophthalmologists, oncologists, and it's working so very well. And they are pleased with it too. And they have been able to help support some of the activities that we have. Plus, Tom, when we've had cases that were done on some of these tiny little tots, we've had surgeries that are done by the Armenians, and we have Tom Lee will follow them. There, done. Tom will follow them while he's in his office in America. He'll be in his office, and through telemedicine, he will be looking through the operating microscope and through some system that he got from one of the electronic companies. He has a device that allows him to speak real time, so that he can be looking at a photograph, or not a photograph, of an image, a video image of the inside of this kid's eye, and say, operate over here, don't operate over here. And it's real time, so that he's the assistant surgeon in all of these procedures. So it's really terrific. There are more and more involved. I know that some of you there have been to Armenia and seen the eye project in action. We now have screenings that we're performing with various types of cameras that will use telemedicine to be able to tell if any evidence of diabetic. No, our plan is to take photographs of every diabetic in the country, and if there's diabetic retinopathy, go ahead and treat with laser, or to have them come back at 3 months, 6 months, 12 months time. And that way we can spot it as soon as it arrives and be able to treat it and prevent blindness. We also, with the same sort of camera, we can tell if there's glaucoma, we can tell if there's macular degeneration or any kind of brain tumor. It's really been fantastic. And what I'm so grateful of is so many of these companies and people, the inventors, have given us these things for free. I agree that you need a lot of money, and the diaspora has been terrific for us, because the Armenian diaspora have given tons of money for these endeavors that we've done. But at this point in time, I must tell you, our interest now is in education. We brought over that first set of doctors. We brought over 12 when you saw all those people that had taken fellowships. We brought over 12 of those doctors for glaucoma, retina, cornea, anterior segment, neuro-ophthalmology, etc. And I must tell you, when they came, when I was talking to Krikorian, this is what he paid for. And he said, how long are they going to be coming for? And I said, a year. So, and I said, he said, what about their families? I said, well, we hadn't made provision for the families. He said, well, they have to come with their families. You can't take an Armenian away from his family for a year. And he was right. And we brought them over. We paid for their families. We got a place for them to stay. Bought them a car, not bought them a car, but had them rent a car for the year, and had malpractice insurance for them and medical insurance for the family. And told them when they went back that they would have all the equipment that they needed, all the equipment that they were experiencing in America, we would bring to Armenia so that they could, when they came back, they could hit the ground with both feet run. And all my friends said, oh my God, don't do that, because they'll never go back. They'll defect, they'll stay. And I'm proud to tell you, not one stayed. Every single doctor went back. And they all went back and become rock stars in Armenia, because they are really experienced. Plus, they're getting cases from other countries. I cannot tell you how many cases, how many patients come from other countries, particularly for the retinopathy of prematurity aspect. Because we even built an operating room inside a neonatal intensive care unit that's inside a maternity hospital. So the kid doesn't have to travel anywhere. Often we would put him in an incubator and send him over to the Malayan Eye Hospital, and the child would be dead by the time he got there, because it was such a, these are very sick kids. So by having them all within the maternity hospital, we're able to operate on them and prevent them from losing vision, and that's vision for life. So it's become, it's very exciting, and I still get choked up.
Yeah.
We've been very pleased with the program. Plus, the next generation is coming over now. We're right in the midst of, in fact, we had gotten our glaucoma person all finished with his fellowship, and just about when the retina person came over and the two cornea people were coming into UCLA at Stein, is when the coronavirus hit. So unfortunately, they had to go back. I sent back Tadevek Adamyan and stopped the other two from coming over. So once everything calms down in this country, at that point in time, we didn't even have the protests. So once everything calms down, we're going to bring them back. But I think that the most impressive thing is, even though we still go, we used to go twice a year, now we only go once a year. But when we go, the rule I have is the Armenian, that if the case is unique, then the American doctor can operate on it. But if the case is not unique, then the Armenian doctor operates and the American is the assist. And it's worked out very well. It means that you have to let people know that ahead of time, because some people go just to practice on their surgical techniques, and that's not what we're interested in. But it has been a very successful program, and it continues to be to do well. And as I say, now we're doing screenings of both elderly, of diabetics, and of school children. We have the Welsh Allen spot camera, and we're given 10 of those, and we bring them into the school, the preschools, and into the kindergartens to test whether or not these kids have got any risk factors for having amblyopia that either has developed or might develop. If you got a kid who's bilaterally hyperopic, he's going to possibly develop amblyopia. But it's been very exciting, and I mean, it's been the honor of a lifetime to do this. So I love it, and if any of you are interested in coming over with us, be happy to have you come and join us. Thanks. I've talked too long. Sorry.
That's okay. It was great hearing you. I think what's fascinating about what you're doing is you have so many non-Armenian physicians helping you and American companies. That's unusual. How did you go about recruiting so many non-Armenian physicians to assist you?
Larry, you remember when you came over with us?
Yeah.
And I asked you if you could give a talk in the middle of the, I don't know if you had slides or not, but you gave a great talk. And at first you said, no, really, I'm not prepared. And later on, you did. One of the things, if you're going to start a program like this, you need to be very persistent and not take no for an answer. Both from anyone who you're asking to come over with you, or any Armenian donor or non-Armenian. My biggest donation in the early years was from a guy by the name of Gregory Flint, who, very nice guy, who was an engineer and who helped me with the design of that mobile eye hospital. And he was terrific. And then he gave me a $200 donation for the eye project. But little did I know that he also left us in his will, and very nicely died soon thereafter. So all that money went into the building of that mobile eye hospital, which has his name on the side of the, it's really Gregory Flint has been absolutely a terrific guy. And I'm sure that he's smiling in heaven, because we've had hundreds of thousands of people that we've examined, both in the hospital and operated on in there, from cataracts to cataract surgery, retina surgery, cornea, strabismus, everything we've operated on. It's been amazing.
You know, over the years, I'm sure there were a lot of challenges. What is one of the more memorable challenges that you had to address?
Well, anyone that's been over there multiple times and brought things over knows this one. Customs. You know, when we brought the truck over, I think they were going to tax an enormous amount of money, because the mobile eye hospital cost $2 million. The guy that built it, Rick Corcoran in New Hampshire, did it for half that price, and because we're a humanitarian organization. And the customs officials were going to charge us about $500,000 just to bring it in, so we could do things for free. So there's always been those problems. It's just, prior to this talk, I looked at all of the papers that I had written back to both Eileen, my wife, who was kind enough to let me go year after year. But I'd write back to her, tell her what my recent gripes were. And it was really, I can tell you that one of the things that, if those of you that are interested in doing it, and I'm sure that those of you that have already done it know, the first thing you've got to do, you've got to get a partner in the country you can work with. I've been very lucky having Alex Malayan as the doctor that I've been with. He's been terrific. And so now every so often I need to get a piece of equipment for Alex well, so that he can use it. But he's great, and others have too. But I remember that was whenever we bring something over, we have to deal with customs. But other than that, I cannot recall bad experiences. They really have all been good, and it makes me feel good.
Good. We have Dr. Akimian on the phone. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Armenia?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen because I've been working with a student who has voluntarily, excuse me, a recent MPH graduate who has done an amazing job taking data from the Ministry of Health website and from the National Centers for Disease Control. And I've talked about this a little bit with Solin because I was looking for some input into what she's done. She's taken overall trends of daily incidents, which many of us have seen and which is sort of more easily accessible on the Armenian National Centers for Disease Control site, but she's given it some context. What I've asked her to do for the next round is to point out well, let me go through the slides and then I'll show you. This is the first time that I've seen data like this collated, at least in the English language. I haven't seen it in Armenian, but I don't read Armenian easily. But she does read Armenian easily, and she had to go through the Ministry of Health website and cull through to get age and sex, which are the only two variables that she was able to find at this point. So, so the majority are. The majority of reported genders are male. That's this pie chart on the right. And then females over here, but there's 25% that are not reported, that there's a death in the website that is not reported on the gender. And then these are the ages. So these are the age groups here. And again, you can see the distribution. Interestingly enough, the 60 to 69 age group is the highest majority, but unsurprisingly, you know, it's age sort of 60 and above for the attributable deaths. But again, these same 24 deaths that don't have gender also do not have age. What I was particularly interested in having her do for me, and I think this for me is very important data, this is cases and testing rates. Because one of the arguments is that, you know, that the total number of tests have gone up, and therefore the total number of found cases has gone up. But this is the total number of tests here, the bar graph, right? And total number of positive cases found. And May 4th, I don't know if you can see my cursor, is right about here. So the next iteration of this, we're gonna have a couple of icons from first case to the Echmiadzin cluster to when the businesses kind of started opening up end of April to then the end of the shelter in place order, so that we can see this within the chronological context. And, but certainly, and Solin helped me to kind of learn and understand about this data, that the positive test rate is going up, and that's quite worrisome. And she said that it's nearing some of the incident rate data that she was saying was reported for New York and New Jersey, and it's definitely worrisome, and the government is certainly worried about this. Let me see if there's another slide. So this is March, the month of March, from first case here until the end of the month. And then these were when eligibility, or when the criteria for testing was certainly, you know, if you had come in from certain countries or if you had been exposed or things like that. They don't have that eligibility criteria any longer. This is April for cases, recoveries, and deaths. And then this is the month of May. And so you can see, and again, I'm sorry, but the axis, the axes have the numbers have changed, right? So here you're going from 0 to 70 in the month of March, you know, to read the graph. And by May, you're going from 0 to 500.
Different scale. The
scale, yeah. So, this is Aras Chiloyan, and there's a group of young public health specialists that are meeting to try to figure out what they can do with the data available to them to use it as a better educational tool, both for us and the diaspora and in Armenia, to try to show a chronology and to try to show through numbers that the shelter in place was in fact working, but that without a phased reopening, right, and reopening quickly, and without enforcement of social distancing the way that they're starting to now, that there was an immediate, they opened May 4th, and by May 24th, which was expected, they saw a tremendous increase in cases and in the ability to report hospitalizations is not meaningful here, because every case that was positive until May 22nd was hospitalized. And so we use hospitalizations as a proxy measure for looking at the curve and the surge and the, and cases, right? We look at that for New York, New Jersey. But if everybody that's positive was hospitalized, that's not going to be meaningful at that time. Currently, starting in May 22nd, they were no longer able, that was just not sustainable. And so they are asking people who test positive, who have mild cases, to self-isolate at home, which, as those of you who know Armenia well know, it's very hard to do in multi-generational families in very small housing quarters. And the primary care healthcare system, I don't think, is yet well prepared to do that monitoring on a standardized level. And so there's a quick ramp up of learning happening, and learning and training, but panic, and it's a tough situation. I do think moving forward that we will be able to use hospitalization as some kind of an indicator about severity. What Sean Shechardimian has said about these graphs is that they continue to show at this point a lower mortality rate per case than has been seen in other countries of similar resources. But again, it remains to be seen. We're early on, which just sucks, right? It's just that we're still early on in this story, even though it feels like it's been forever. And so what I would say to the diaspora is that, again, I will repeat that the steps taken by the Ministry of Health have been evidence-based, and where there is a lot of criticism is in this idea of differentiating the messaging that early on, was sort of trying to calm the public, but that was, again, an evidence. There was the WHO and others guidance that was coming out was different in February and early March than it is now. They have recently mandated the use of masks, and they have now enforcement behind that. And there is some talk that the lack of mandate early on was harmful, but there was also talk in the government that there was not an availability of masks on the market, and there was still a concern that healthcare professionals didn't have enough masks. So they waited until there was domestic production of masks in order to be able to mandate them. So my understanding is that the production capacity in Armenia today is 200,000 masks. If it's not per day, then it's per week. It's something very high and reasonable, and therefore there's not the gouging of prices that had been seen in March, April, and May when this first came out. So it's a little bit easier to demand that the public wear masks if you know that the public could attain a mask. There has been missed opportunities and mixed messaging on the highest level. Prime Minister Pashinyan was seen advocating for masks, but then was photographed at a official gathering in Artsakh without a mask and in a location where nobody was wearing a mask. And there was an official photo that was actually given to the press. And then when there was backlash about that, there was an insufficient explanation given by a spokesperson who said something about Artsakh having different levels of restrictions than Armenia, and just didn't hold water. And similarly, Mr. Pashinyan has come out saying that he has tested positive for the virus, and yet in the story, he feels like he was exposed by a waiter who, I don't know if you guys saw this, but by a waiter who brought a glass of water to him in Parliament. And it just was sort of still a little bit too victim blaming. And so I think there's room for improvement on the national level that may be a real outsider's perspective. Certainly there are conspiracy theories abounding in Armenia, like there are in every society around the world, about the hoax that this virus is, or about the who's responsible, like George Soros or Bill Gates. And these conspiracy theories are no less prevalent in the Armenian society, and the need to debunk them is sincere. And there appears to be some evidence to support the value of continually debunking with trustful, credible resources. But Armenia has limited resources, and I think for the resources they have, you can find a lot of the social media and public service announcements and continual interviews on every channel of television every day, and yet it's still not enough to support the kind of compliance and adherence that would be necessary to really change the curve without having another shelter-in-place policy ordered, which the government is very hesitant to do. But there is a growing call for doing that, for having another shelter-in-place order and sort of resetting the clock. And I'm not sure how that's going to go, because that would be absolutely devastating economically and maybe unrecoverable economically. And so I'm not sure where that discussion and debate is going to go.
Kim, do you get the sense that they're underreporting COVID-related deaths? One of your slides suggested that there were people with COVID who died, but they weren't designated as COVID deaths.
So that's something that both Shant and I have asked, and we are trying to understand. There are, even here in the United States, right, there are differing definitions of a COVID death. And so they are now reporting COVID deaths that, deaths that are not COVID related among people who test positive for COVID. So the question is, if you have terminal stage 4 cancer and you're in, hospice and you test positive and you die, is it a COVID death, or is it COVID positive non-COVID response? And so I don't have the abilities to understand that nuance, but I could imagine, just from the question that you're asking, that people who are skeptical about transparent data reporting from Armenia and from former Soviet states, might be asking that same question. I know that the minister has described this phenomenon, and I think that I want to, at this point, wait until I hear an explanation of that data, but I don't see or feel that there is a tremendous pressure to lower the number of deaths. What I do worry about is the stigma that being COVID positive has become in Armenia. And I wonder if, in a certain sense, this kind of victim blaming messaging has also added to that. So like we had in the United States here recently, the New York Times reported the 100,000 cases, and they listed the names. I think many of you have seen that front cover, and it's very powerful. And so I suggested something like that, because you see it in a lot of the interviews with people on the news, the interviews of people on the street, and they'll say, but I don't know anybody who got sick. I don't really think I'm gonna get sick. I don't feel, I don't know anybody. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to write the names, the ages, the stories, how many children they had, how many grandchildren they had. And then I was told, but nobody wants to give permission for their relative's name to be publicized that way. And so I think there's a lot of cultural context that I still, even having spent so much time there, still need to learn and understand before making any suggestions about improved risk communication. And I understand that, a lot of this has to come from the stakeholders within that best understand the culture and society there.
Very hard position to be in. And there's lots of collateral damage from not working and people not being able to pay their rent. And you mentioned food insecurity here in the United States. It's amazing when you drive past a park and you see a truck and a whole string of cars with their trunks up waiting to get the food in the trunk. It's hard to believe it's the United States. That was really wonderful. Are there any other questions for Kim? It's really getting super late.
Yeah.
I think Greg's interesting with great intensity about what he can ship to Armenia next.
Well, not much, unfortunately. And hello, everybody. Not much. A lot of stuff are still, a lot of items are still offline here. Priority is going to medical centers and businesses that are in the midst of reopening, especially in California. We were supposed to have a slew of openings this week, but we've had other problems to deal with. But anyhow, we're still, as far as supplies are concerned, extremely limited. I mean, none. I would say probably the past month and a half, we haven't been able to source anything. Just keeping a supportive role. However, we have been able to source from neighboring Georgia and Russia, although in limited quantities. But we'll see where it goes. It's really really disappointing with the situation unfolding in Armenia. I was hoping personally to have I was expecting at the very least for them to have a phased reopening, and but I guess it's a whole different topic and a wider discussion.
Yeah. One of the ways we're able to get things, there's Amazon and there's Amazon for healthcare providers. We've had more success on the healthcare providers where Amazon prioritizes the deliveries. So I'm not sure if you have a network of healthcare providers you can work with, or you yourself as a charity can register as a provider or in the health field.
We can only obtain a certain quantity as a charity and as a business. And that's a really limited quantity. Usually what works best when we're shipping to Armenia is for it to be a mass quantity, at least like a pallet. That's where we get the real best deal with the air cargo companies. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to source anything near a pallet, but just individual. But it's something probably we should look into, at least have 10 or 20 or 30 healthcare professionals who can pitch in.
Yeah, we're more than happy to help. We have a whole team in my office. They're scavengers, man. They're all over the place. We're ordering, and it's hard. You get onesie, twosies, and you think you have an order, it's canceled. The delivery date gets pushed back a month. Well, again, I want to say good night to our weekly friends. It's hard to believe 13 weeks have gone by. So we'll see you all next week.